Hi friends, welcome to our video, and today we are going to discuss access modifiers in C Sharp. So what are access modifiers are? Access modifiers are the keywords that defines where your variables, class, properties can be accessed within your project or within your classes or within your assemblies. So basically .NET provides 5 types of access modifiers, and these are private, public, protected, internal, as well as internal protected. Internal protected. So we will go through the each of these variable in our simple short demo, right? So first it will come as a protected. So I have one console application in which I have two assemblies, assembly 1 as well as assembly 2, right? So what I will do, I will make this variables property as private, and we'll see whether I can access these variables outside of this class, right? In which class in which I have defined these properties as well as the method. So I have another class, derived class, and that is as inheriting assembly 1 class. So if I want to access these variables that are private in base class, then I can't. You can see IntelliSense is not providing because the private members have the scope in that class only in which they have defined. So if I give you the example, then if I have this class and I have private members there, then I can't access these variables outside of this class. The scope is limited to this class only. So this is private, right? These are private. Now the next term comes public. As the name specifies, public are accessible to all the members of that project or assembly or the class. So if I have public public public, right, that means I can, so I have public keywords and I am deriving this assembly 1 class having public keywords, so I can access all the members where 1 or sample 2 sample as well as in this also temp dot where 1 sample all the members, right? So these are the public. Now the third term comes as a protected. So what are protected are? Protected keyword. Protected is the keyword in which if we define our variable, property or method as a protected, then we can access that variable in that class only in which we are inheriting the class in which we have defined the base protected. So I have one class, assembly 1 class, and I am making it protected, right? So I'm making it protective and assembly 1 class, and I'm deriving this assembly 1 class in another class, that is der class. So if I want to access this sample that is protected in the base class, then I can, and property I can. So what that means, that I can access this variables defined in the as a protected of the base class if we are inheriting that base class in another class, but not outside that, not outside the deriving class. That means if we are not inheriting this assembly 1 class and we have another class, then we can't access the members, because you can see where temp is equal to new assembly 1 class, and if I make the temp dot, then you can see it is not showing sample as well as the Where? Because we are not inheriting this assembly one class in an intern demo. So if we go through diagrammatically, then if we have one class and we have protected, right, then we can access in the class. If we are inheriting, this is derived, this is parent, then it can be accessible in this class. But if we are not inheriting another class and this, then we can't access these protected key members in another class if we are not inheriting the base class in which protected has been defined. So protected keyword has the scope in the class itself or in the class that is inheriting it. Now the next term comes in internal. So what is internal is, right? So the best use is of the internal is, suppose you have the requirement that you have one class that is assembly 1, but you don't want to make this class accessible in assembly 2. What that means is that the scope of the internal member should be in the assembly 1, right? So what that means is, what that means, if I am making this internal class, right, and I am making this internal, so keep it simple. I am making the property as a private because we are going to make the internal, right? So this assembly 1 class is internal, right? And we have the reference of assembly 1 in assembly 2. That means we want to access this assembly 1 class in assembly 2, right? So if I make it public, then I can easily do, right? Assembly 1 class is equal to obj is equal to new assembly 1 class, right? I can make it, right? I can access if any members have the public, then I can access that members or methods. But sometimes you have the requirement that you don't want to expose your class in one assembly to the another assembly. Then if you make it internal, then you can see it is just showing the compile time error that it is inaccessible in another assembly. That means if you have the requirement that you want to make the scope of your class variables inside the defining assembly and not outside the defining assembly, then you can make it internal. So if I go through the diagrammatically, that means if you have one assembly and you have that class, internal class, that means you can use this internal class in this assembly only. You can't access this class in another assembly. In shorter term, internal keyword has the scope in its defining assembly and not outside its defining assembly, right? So the next term comes, and the last term is internal protected. What is internal protected is? Internal protected is the combination of internal as well as the protected. That means if I make my class or variables as internal protected, 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 right? So let me copy all the stuff, right? So I have one class that is internal. Let's So I have one class that is assembly1 class, and by default types are internal, right? And I have one variable that is internal protected. I have one property that's a internal protected and method as internal protected. And I am just deriving this base class in which I have defined this internal protected in the derived class, right? So by the definition of protected, as I said, it is a combination of protected as well as the internal, right? So if I go through the protected, then I can access all the members in my derived class because I am deriving, right? Right, but the protected keyword is not accessible inside the class in which we are not inheriting the base class, right? In my previous example, I can see that I was not able to access the assembly1 class variables. Why? Because they were protected, but they were accessible in the class in which we are deriving the base class. So here the internal comes. As we can see that internal scope is within the assembly. That means we can access internal keywords in this assembly, whole assembly, right? But not outside that assembly. So if I make the object of assembly1 class, and if I temp dot, then you can see it is var1, right? And var2 as well as the sample. That means internal keyword is making it accessible to the assembly in which it is defined, as well as the protected is making it accessible to the derived in class. So it is the combination of protected as well as the internal. So what is protected internal is, suppose you have the assembly. So you have protected internal members here, right? So you can access, and you have the class in which you have protected internal. So you can access, you can use this variable in the derived class inside the assembly, as well as since they are internal also, so we can access in any area of that assembly itself. That means protected internal access members are accessible in the derived class as well as the another class that are defined in that assembly itself and not outside that assembly. So these are the protected internal keywords, right? So these were access modifiers. So friends, for the summary reason, I just want to gives a brief introduction. What is private? Private scope is only limited to the class in which it is defined, not outside that class. What is public? Public are accessible in anywhere, in whole the project, anywhere we can access public keywords. What is protected? Protected keywords we can define in, we can access in class itself in which they are defining, or in the class that is inheriting the base class in which we have defined the protected. That means protected can be accessible in the base class as well as the derived class, right? What is internal? Suppose you have the requirement that you want to access your class or the variables inside your assembly and not outside your assembly, right? So if you will make your types or methods as internal, that means you can access these variables or the methods or the property in that assembly and not outside that assembly. That needs to keep in mind. What is internal protected? So it is the combination of internal as well as the protected. So if we are making, so we can see if we are making any variables as a internal protected, that means we can access these variables, we can access these variables methods in the derived class or any class that is defined in main assembly, right? So that is protected internal basically is. So friends, we have one our YouTube channel, that is virtual code, in which we are posting every day each video that are basic to the programming language. We are going to publish Azure as well as uh, PowerShell videos also, as well as the SQL Server, basic of SQL Server, basic of PowerShell, basic of Azure, so that you can have idea of basic uh, fundamentals of these technologies. So I request you to subscribe this code virtual so that you can have the latest updates, and also press this bell icon so that you can have the just notification whenever we are going to post our new videos. So thank you for your time. See you soon.